I don't know why. That's just how I felt. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to be going over all the books I read in October. I didn't read as many books as I was hoping to read. It took me a while to get into some of the books I read this month. Not really because of the books I was reading. It kind of had to do with me just being busy and not being able to pick up the books I was reading as often as I would have liked. I only read 5 books this month, which isn't terrible, but I feel like I've been reading way less than the amount I was reading at the beginning of the year. Like I was reading like 7 to 10 books a month, but now I'm reading like half of that, which is fine. It's not a big deal. Anyways, so I read 5 books this month, and I'm gonna just get into those books and tell you my thoughts. So the first book I started off with in October is The Great Alone by Kristen Hanna. I've heard a lot of good things about this author, so I was excited to finally read one of her books. This is a historical fiction book based in Alaska in 1974, and it basically follows a family. You get the perspective from the daughter. The timeline of the book kind of starts off when she's like a preteen, I believe 13, and then you follow her until she's about 18 years old. So there's a good chunk of years in this book. That's why it's so long. It's through Lenny's point of view, and she's the daughter. And it kind of has to do with her father and her mother. They decide to move to Alaska because the father was in the Vietnam War, and he's finally done with the war, and he has some issues, PTSD, and stuff like that, and they kind of just want to start over with a clean slate. It's about their time in Alaska, getting acquainted with their new town and all the people in the town. There's a lot of family issues in this book, the relationship between her father and her mother, and then also just her relationship with her father. Look up the trigger warnings before you read this book. Initially, it was hard for me to get into this book, I think, just because there's a lot of heavy topics in this book, and you follow the family through a huge chunk of time, years. So just initially it was hard for me to get into this book. I feel like I wasn't truly invested to the last 200 pages, and this book is almost 600 pages. So, and also like I said, I wasn't really picking up my book as often as I would have liked. So I feel like if I read it in a shorter period of time, I would have been my rating would have been higher. Oh, I also wrote that I feel like a lot of the beginning of the book, the first 300 pages, could have been condensed. A lot of it was kind of just following their day-to-day life, and I feel like I kind of got a little lost and just wasn't really invested in the first big chunk of the book, or the first half. Overall, I thought the story was super beautiful and raw, and the last 100 pages of how the story ended made my rating go up. Yeah, I don't want to give too much away, but it's just a real beautiful story about family and about Lenny kind of discovering who she is and kind of trying to do what's best for her and her mother. And it's also a coming of age kind of. I do recommend this book if you're looking for just a standard fiction book that has a lot of depth to it. I rated this book 3.8 stars, I believe. Kind of an annoying rating. I usually don't give ratings like that. I usually do 3.5 or 4 stars, but that just felt right to me, 3.8 stars. So that's what I gave that book. It took me 2 weeks to read that book. That's a really long time for me to finish a book, but I'm glad I read it, and the way it was concluded and the ending was really good in my opinion, and I do recommend that book. It was good. And I think I might read more by Kristen Hanna. But let me know if you have any other recommendations by her. I know a lot of her books are loved. So the second book I read in October was Out on a Limb. This came out this year. This was really talked about on TikTok when it first came out. I didn't really know too much about it going into it. I just knew it was a romance and that the couple meets on Halloween. So I was like, this is a perfect romance to read during the fall time. So that is why I picked it up, and I heard really good things about it. And I can attest to all the good things I heard. This book was really good. This book follows Win and Bo. They meet at a Halloween party, a friend's Halloween party, and they have a one-night stand, and they think they're never going to see each other again, but Win finds out she's pregnant. So yeah, this isn't a spoiler or anything. It says it on the back of the book, and there's also like a kind of introduction to the book and why the author decided to include accidental pregnancy in this book. Just keep that in mind. That is a part of this book. And I feel like that turns a lot of people away from reading books, romance books, but this is not like your typical accidental pregnancy book. This romance was really good, and the author included that in the book really well, and I keep saying really. So the storyline and the characters are unlike any other book I've read. Like I said, accidental pregnancy, I've never read a book that has that trope, I guess, in it. The characters both have disabilities, which I think is really awesome that an author is showcasing that in a romance book, because I feel like I've literally never really read a book that has disabilities. So super cool that the author is showcasing that, and also accidental pregnancy in a good light, like it wasn't frowned upon in the book, which I think is really important. Anyways, so they have a one-night stand. She finds out she's pregnant, so she contacts him, and he decides he's in it for the long run, and it's kind of a slow burn, I would say, because they're really just trying to focus on getting to know each other while she is pregnant, and they're kind of doing it at a slow pace. They aren't really having any expectations. They just both know that they want to raise this child together and do everything they can for the child they're gonna have. Another trope that's in this book is forced proximity, because she moves in with him. So you have that slow burn. I would say friends to lovers for sure. Yeah, overall I thought this romance book was done really well. I think it's really important to showcase struggles that characters have, and yeah, I just admire the way the author showcased certain struggles that a lot of people have that you don't typically read about in romance books. It's super important to include, and it was done really well. I gave this book 4 stars. I highly recommend. The third book I read in October was Powerless by Lauren Roberts, another book that's very talked about on TikTok. This is a fantasy with a subplot of romance. Follows a girl named Peyton and a prince named Kai. They live in this world where basically a plague happened, and the plague caused a certain amount of people to develop powers, and the people that have powers are called the elites, and the people that don't have powers are called the ordinaries. So you get perspective from Peyton and Kai. Peyton isn't ordinary, but she's faking being elite. She says that her power is being psychic. She runs into Kai, and they have this weird kind of encounter, and she thinks she'll never see him again. But then she gets kind of enlisted into these trials where basically it's like the Hunger Games. A group of people are chosen, and they basically fight each other and go through these trials. Not really. Sometimes they're fighting each other, sometimes they're kind of working together. All the people that get put in these trials are usually people that have powers, but she's faking her powers, so she kind of struggles because she really only has her physical abilities, where everyone else actually has really intense powers. So her job is basically trying not to die. Kai is the prince, so he has a brother. His brother is about to be the next king, where Kai isn't going to be. He's been training all his life to basically protect the king and his family. Kai has the power to basically use anyone's power around him. If they're in a certain proximity to him, he's able to use their power. But he's in the trials with Peyton, and Peyton catches his eye, and he doesn't quite know why, because they're pretty opposites, and they're supposed to be against each other, obviously, because they're in these trials together. But they kind of start to team up and form a relationship, and their romance happens. I've talked about this before, but I typically don't read a lot of fantasy. The first fantasy I ever read was Fourth Wing, I think, and then Divine Rivals. I really am new to the fantasy world. I thought I would really love this book because it is fantasy, but it has a pretty big subplot of romance. But the thing is, I think this book is so hyped up. I had very high expectations of it, because a lot of people are saying they loved this more than Fourth Wing, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna love, like, this is gonna be really good. Personally, I did think it was good, but I didn't think it lived up to all the hype, and I do enjoy Fourth Wing more than this book, which I don't really want to compare the two, but because they are very different. The only thing similar is that they're both fantasies and they both have a big subplot of romance, but I think there was just like too much. I wasn't really invested in the fantasy side of this book, whereas in Fourth Wing I was. Not the trials, but like everything leading up to the trials and stuff like that just didn't really interest me that much. But I did think overall the book was good. But I did like enjoy the tension between Peyton and Kai and the buildup of their romance. It did also take me a while to read this book, longer than I thought it would. I think it took me a week or so, a little bit over a week, which is pretty long for me, and I think if I read it in a shorter chunk of time, my rating would have been higher, because I almost like was forgetting what was happening, and since I was reading so little every time I picked up the book, I like wasn't really excited to pick it up again because I kind of like forgot where I was at and what was going on and stuff like that. So that's my bad. But overall, I did think this book was good and I enjoyed it. I gave it 3.8 stars. Another weird rating for me, but that just felt right to me. So 3.8 stars. I would recommend if you're just trying to get into fantasy and you like romance. I think I will continue this series. I'm not sure when the next book comes out, but yes, I will probably continue it. The next book I read in October is Wildfire by Hannah Grace. This was one of my most anticipated reads of 2023. This is the second book to Icebreaker. I really loved Icebreaker and picked this up as soon as I could and wanted to read it ASAP. Okay, I don't want to start off negative, but a lot of people were saying they liked this more than Icebreaker. I don't feel the same way. I enjoyed Icebreaker way more than I enjoyed this book. It's about Russ and Aurora. They meet at a college party. They both go to the same college. They have a one-night stand and they think they're never going to see each other again. It's about to be summer and they both run into each other at a summer camp, and they're both camp counselors. Russ is very much like shy and Aurora's kind of the opposite. They're both obviously physically attracted to one another, but they don't really know each other at all. So when they run into each other at this camp, they're like, what do we do? Like, do we ignore this? Do we... etc. So a big chunk of this book takes place at the camp, which I kind of had like a love-hate relationship with. I don't know. He is a hockey player on the hockey team. Yeah, this book was very, very different than Icebreaker. Like, Icebreaker took place at the college and the hockey aspect was a huge part of it, whereas this, even though he's on the hockey team, like, it's not mentioned as much as Icebreaker because it's like during the summer and they're at a summer camp. I guess you would say forced proximity. I would say it's He Falls First. Again, I didn't really enjoy the setting of the camp, and I think because the initial interaction they had was physical, I felt like it was kind of hard. I don't know, I didn't really enjoy the romance that much. Each of the characters had a lot of depth to them and had like some struggles and family trauma they were working through, which I think is good to include because it adds more depth to the characters as individuals. But for me, like, their romance, I wasn't like super invested in their romance. I don't know why. That's just how I felt. I thought this book was alright. I'm definitely gonna still read the next book that comes out, but definitely was not as good as Icebreaker in my opinion. I think that's all I'm gonna say about this. I gave it 3 stars. Still good, but not my favorite. The final book I read in October is A Flicker in the Dark by Stacey Willingham. This is my first psychological thriller book. I spoke about this in my last video. I wanted to read a book like this from this genre in October because Halloween. So I started this book on the 29th of October and I finished it on the 31st of October. So I read this very fast. It definitely had my attention and had me thinking. So this follows a girl named Chloe, and you get perspective from the past and the present time. When she was about 13 in the past, a bunch of girls started going missing in her town and then were found dead. So a serial killer was clearly on the loose. None of this is spoilers because it's touched on the back. So all these girls start going missing and they find out that it's her father that's committing these crimes and murders. So huge shock to her and her family. He goes to jail and she basically never sees him again. 20 years go by, she's trying to live her life. She's a psychologist. It's basically following her point of view 20 years later, and it's like the anniversary of these crimes her father committed, and all of a sudden more girls start going missing. She's not in the same town, she's in a town like close by. There's clearly a pattern happening, and there's a lot of theories like, oh, it's been 20 years since what your father did. So yeah, there's a huge question mark on why is this happening again, who's doing this. It kind of drives her insane, and you're basically following her point of view. She is very much like detective mode, like she is trying to figure this shit out. So yeah, you get present time, and then you're getting the past unfolding, the events of them finding out their father committed the crimes. There's a really big plot twist. There wasn't like a lot of, I don't want to say gore. This definitely is like psychological. It'll have you thinking. You're gonna want to keep reading to figure out what's going on and who's doing these things. So I was really invested in this, and I did enjoy it a lot. I read it super fast, and I think I will continue reading books from this genre. Probably not like very often, but I did enjoy it, and I'm happy I finally read something like this. I gave this 3.8 stars. I don't know what was with me this month, but like most of the books I read, I was like, this is 3.8. So that is what I gave this book. I would recommend this if you're just starting to get in, if you want to like dip your toes into a thriller or a psychological thriller. Thank you, my amazing coworker and friend, for recommending this. Okay. Those are all the books I read in October. Definitely not the amount I was hoping to read, but that's okay. We're doing our best. Overall, pretty good reading month for me. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed hearing me talk about those books. I don't know if I'll be posting again before my November reading wrap up, but I guess we'll see. But thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate you so much. See you in my next video.